Victoria Phillips, to chair the next panel, panel 3. And all the other duties are now transferred to you. So the floor is yours. Please convene your folk, which is not a very big one now because there was one cancellation. But please, the floor is yours, and you can start panel 3 right now.
Thank you so much, Csaba, Professor Bekish. And I just want to give you a special thanks to Corvinus, to the Dean, to you, to Mark for his wonderful keynote. And, you know, as you know, Csaba, this has been a long-term partnership, and it has become a core part of the European Institute's program to have our students become a part of the Corvinus conference. And we do so appreciate your hosting them each year. And we look forward to decades of cooperation.
Just like us.
Just like us.
Exactly.
So thank you so much. And it's an honor to be here. And it's also been such an honor to include the London School of Economics into this program. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we've been unable to bring the West Point Military Academy cadets with us this year, but we are hoping that has been a really successful program that is truly contributing to civil-military relations. We hope globally, as some of the fellows from many, many years ago are starting to go out as senior people in the U.S. Army. So we're looking forward to continuing that with all the good graces once we get through this, and I look forward to seeing you soon. With that, I'd like to just let everybody know that we will start with Clara, and then go to Veronika. Unfortunately, Ruby is not able to be here. She's quite ill, but she is hoping to reapply for next year and continue. And what we'll do is we'll have the two presentations back to back, and then have a question and answer period. Both Clara and Veronika were Cold War Archival Research Fellows. Many of the Columbia students were. So these projects are based pretty much solely on going to archives in the COVID world. So these papers have been largely supported by either the wonderful archivists who have managed scanning, good finding aids at the University of Arkansas, and a cooperative relationship there. And also special thanks to Nick Cohen, who has really helped us to understand how to use digital archives, and the many people who have participated with History Online, which is a series of seminars where we go to various countries. The Open Society Archive was a pioneer in this effort. We were thrilled to have them, and actually Mark will be doing a session in the fall, in October, on specifically the Russian archives. So we are always experimental, and thank you for tolerating us. Clara is currently a rising senior at Barnard College of Columbia University. She was born in Rome, Italy, but raised outside of Boston. She has always had a deep appreciation and connection to European, specifically Italian history and culture. In fact, at Barnard, Clara is completing her BA in European history along with a minor in cellular biology and the pre-medical track. She is still unsure of where her future will take her, but she hopes to either pursue medical school or history academia. And regardless of which path she will take, she definitely hopes to stay in New York City. Outside of school, Clara enjoys playing her viola, running, and spending time with friends and family. With that, I will hand it over to Clara.
Thank you. So let me share my screen. Sorry, just one second. Okay. Can Can you all see my screen, Professor? Can you see it? Okay, great. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Clara LEVRERO. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Clara LEVRERO, and as Professor said, I am a student at Barnard College pursuing my BA in History. And today I'm here to talk to you about the way in which Giancarlo Menotti, who's an American-Italian operatic composer, contributed to furthering United States interests during the Cold War. Now, while there is scholarship on Menotti's art, there is nothing, no research about his role during the Cold War and the way in which his works related to the Cold War. But after working on this project for about a month, I think that that should not be the case and that this topic does deserve further research. And today I will specifically be arguing what is on the slide right now, which is that Menotti's potential role as an agent for U.S. Cold War interests is supported by the political tones of his opera The Consul, his founding of the Spoleto Festival as a site for cultural exchange between the U.S. and Italy, and the pro-American nature of his fundraising for the festival. And before I break that down, I did want to provide some background onto the context between the United States and Italy during the Cold War. So why did the U.S. care about Italy at all? Even though it wasn't a communist country per se, the Italian Communist Party in Italy was very powerful and had the highest membership in Europe outside of the Soviet bloc. So the United States was concerned of the Communist Party gaining power. Also, additionally, because the geography of the Italian peninsula has very strategic positioning, where it had access to North Africa, Western Europe, and the Balkans. So again, the United States was afraid that if the Soviet Union gained control of Italy, that they would have great geographic advantages. And so the United States intervened directly in Italy, economically primarily. So beginning in 1948, they provided a lot of money to the Christian Democratic Party so as they could win the elections and push out the Italian Communist Party despite its large membership. But the United States also did take soft power or more indirect approaches towards maintaining their superiority in Italy. And one way in which they did this was through cultural diplomacy, which, as a definition, is just the process through which two different countries exchange cultures so as to foster mutual understanding. And one way in which the United States engaged in cultural diplomacy was through this Spoleto Festival, which, here on the right, you can see a picture of Spoleto. It's an Italian town, what it looks like today. So what was it? It was started in 1958 by this composer, Giancarlo Menotti, who of course I'm going to be talking about later. It's still held today, which is a fun fact. And if you Google it anywhere, if you go on its website and you go to the history tab, you'll see quickly, it always says designed as a place for cultural exchange between United States and Italian artists. So I said, great, when I started this research, I'm going to look into this. And I also found really quickly that at the time, it became really popular really fast, even in the first few years of its founding. Already in 1960, the London Times called it the most important festival in Europe. Really famous artists went, like Samuel Barber attended, Aaron Copland went, the famous Italian ballerina Carlo went. So, it was kind of a big cultural event. And so I then wondered, why did Giancarlo Menotti found it? And how, especially since it was so important. Like, he obviously needed a lot of money to put this on. And I was wondering, where's this money coming from? And throughout my research, the only quote directly from him where he answers this question was from his biography. And it was the following: I don't really know why I started Spoleto. In America, there's always a tendency of asking why people do things. Well, all of a sudden, I wanted to do a festival, and I did. I didn't ask myself why. So apart from, I'd found this funny, but I also found this to be really unsatisfying, just because clearly if you're putting on, an international festival, your reasoning has to be deeper than just, I don't know why. And so this quote is actually kind of what framed my research project and what led me to try and figure out who Menotti was and why and how he started this festival and what that could mean. First of all, I mean, who was he? He was born in Italy in 1911, but despite retaining his Italian citizenship his entire life, he always referred to himself as an American composer, which I thought was really interesting because it does kind of point to some ambiguous political loyalties where, you know, was he Italian or was he American? It seems like he didn't know either. Anyway, in 1928, he arrived in the United States to study at the Curtis Institute of Music. And following that, he went on to compose several award-winning operas, including this one titled The Consul, which actually won the Pulitzer Prize. And the general plot of The Consul is the following. It takes place in this unnamed totalitarian state. And this woman named Magda, her husband actually is waiting for her at the border to the free world. And she is desperately trying to join him. And so she goes to the consulate of this free world country and she's, you know, begging with the secretary for, you know, the full 2 hours of the opera, being like, please give me the visa. And after, you know, a lot of haggling, she is eventually unable to secure her passage to the free world and she takes her own life out of desperation. So just from the plot, I got the strong sense that this was a very political opera, very pro-American in its tones. And despite the fact that Menotti never made a public statement as to like what, you know, this opera meant for him, the plot itself indicated to me that he did ally himself more with the American side of the Cold War. But I also wanted to look at reviews of the time just to see what, you know, audiences thought this opera stood for. So generally people thought it was wonderful. They loved it. As you know, this review says from its opening night, it was eloquent, momentous, and intense in expression. And most importantly, it says unequaled by any native composer, which I also thought was interesting because I was like, okay, so is he understood to be an American composer by audiences as well? Or I don't know, that kind of confused me a little bit because I was like, okay. Anyway, then going on, it also seemed like audiences also found it to be very pertinent to the time. As this review says, it's like it is as contemporary as the Cold War, surrealism, television, and the atom bomb. It poses an issue which mercilessly confronts humanity today. So this to me meant, okay, well, at least it's not just that this was political, it was understood to be political broadly. And also interestingly, this opera was performed abroad as well after, you know, opening in the United States. This third review is from its performance in Belgrade, Serbia. And it states, you know, it made an impact on the audience because of the variety of themes that, you know, were very pertinent to the people, to Serbians. So that also indicated to me, okay, so not only was understood to be political, it was also performed abroad, probably to further U.S. interests and ideals of freedom and democracy. But moving on, I then wanted to look more deeply onto how exactly he funded this festival. And so I went into the Rockefeller Archives Center in Tarrytown, online. I went to the archives and I looked at correspondences between Nelson Rockefeller and this festival foundation that Menotti started, which was basically a tax-exempt group through which he fundraised money specifically for American participation in the Spoleto Festival. And in the charter of the foundation, it actually says that the purpose was to disseminate throughout the world the works of American composers and knowledge and appreciation of the musical culture, standards, and ideals. Which to me was, you know, okay, wow. So not only is he starting this festival that seems to be a place for Italian-American cross-cultural engagement, but he specifically wanted to fund American participation, specifically to make sure that the rest of the world understood this, like, the grandiosity of American culture and that, you know, all of that, which I thought, okay, so this also indicates that perhaps he was leaning towards the United States. And also something that was really important in these correspondences that I looked at was that in order to convince wealthy benefactors such as Nelson Rockefeller to donate, Menotti always framed it as like, you should donate because this is a great opportunity for presentations of American culture, which, you know, again, proves the point I've been saying over and over, which is that he clearly wanted American participation at this festival, but it also specifically shows the way in which he understood the festival. So it kind of proves like, okay, Menotti understood this to be a place for American Italian cultural exchange, and that is how he advertised it to, you know, wealthy benefactors. And I also would like to say that I only looked at letters between the Festival Foundation and Nelson A. Rockefeller because that's all I had access to due to COVID. But I do know, you know, there's allusions in the letters that they also reached out to the Ford Foundation, to other members of the Rockefeller family. And so I think, you know, when the archives open up again, that would be a really great place to further the research to see how they, you know, reached out to other benefactors. But importantly, this was hinted at in the correspondences, it often said that the festival was made possible by grants from the United States government. So now we're also getting into the government. And I was never able to access any documents that proved like the nature or the amount of money that the United States gave to the Spoleto Festival. But the fact that it happened at all, in combination with the fact that he was invited to at least 2 White House state dinners. On the right, this is the invitation from when he went to a dinner under the Johnson administration for Princess Margaret. But anyway, yeah, the fact that he was invited to these state dinners also indicates to me like, okay, well, maybe he did have some sort of deeper relationship with the US government where maybe they knew he was some kind of Cold War operative for them. But of course, I can't, you know, what I found this month doesn't prove anything at all. But I do think it would be interesting to maybe get a hold of his FBI file, even though there's a huge wait time to get that. But I mean, that would definitely clear up a lot surrounding his relationship specifically to the United States government and to how perhaps, yeah, that, you know, the relationship between the two of them was very clear and, yeah, in terms of the Cold War. But a side note is that the Spoleto Festival did also have an offshoot in the United States, in Charleston, which was run by Menotti for a couple of years. And that festival, I found documents from the University of Arkansas that proved that it got substantial funding from the Department of State. Specifically in 1978, it received $20,000, which in today's money is about $80,000. So that's a pretty big sum to get the festival on its feet. So the United States government was certainly involved. And so in terms of conclusions, direct conclusions, of what does this mean? So clearly the Spoleto Festival was a site for American-Italian cross-cultural exchange. There's no question about that in my mind. Then Menotti sought heavy American funding for the festival, as you could remember from the correspondences with Nelson Rockefeller, and specifically for the purpose of showcasing American culture. And further, his authorship of the opera The Consul / his founding funding of the festival suggests that he supported United States Cold War interests. And then in terms of future directions, I think there's 2 greater implications that this research leads to. The first is what I've been talking about today, which is, you know, perhaps he was genuinely aligned with American Cold War interests and he, you know, wanted to use his artistry and his connections and his opera to further that mission. And that's what he did, which would be very interesting. But an alternative option would be that he didn't actually care at all about American Cold War interests, or maybe he even denounced them, but he did really care about starting a festival because perhaps he wanted to, you know, bring like an Italian town like Spoleto back to life, or he wanted to provide a platform for young artists, whatever it was. So he wanted to start a festival, but he knew that the only way for it to be successful and for it to get enough money was to have the support of the United States. And in order to have the support of the United States, he would have to, play off of the Cold War and use Cold War interests to get what he wanted. In which case, that would be even more interesting, at least in my opinion, because then that would, tackle the idea of like how artists play off of like current political trends to get what they want and to further their artistry. But in either case, whichever of these future directions the project ends up being, I do think that, Menotti's role in the Cold War is significant, and you can see that through the roles, his authorship of the Consul, the founding of the Spoleto Festival, and the way in which he fundraised. And I do think that it is a field or a topic that deserves further research. So yeah, I would like to say thank you for inviting me. It was a great honor to be here. And I'd also like to thank Professor Phillips for all her guidance, and especially Nick Cohen, who's incredibly helpful, and everyone in the CWAR program for all of the support. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We will now hand the podium over to Veronika. She was born to Icelandic parents in Manhattan. She grew up in Prague and the Czech Republic and in Iceland. She received her BA from the University of Iceland in the spring of 2020 and is currently completing her first year in the dual MA at Columbia and the London School of Economics in International and World History, and is also a CWAR Fellow. Her dissertation will revolve around American cultural diplomacy in Cold War Iceland, holding the provisional title of American Culture for Export, the 1959 Ballet USA Tour in Iceland. This project has mainly been inspired by lifelong personal ties to the Icelandic Cultural Society and an international upbringing. So thank you so much. Veronika, welcome.
Thank you, Professor Phillips, and thank you, Clara, for your great presentation. It leads very well into what I'm about to talk about too. So I'm going to share my screen, but I think it'd be best if I turned off my video while I did it, because Teams seems to be kicking me out whenever I try. So we'll see if this works. And yeah, please tell me if it doesn't work, just like speak out. It's loading for me. There we go. Okay.
I am not seeing it. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'm setting some security boundaries or whatever. Okay, let me try one more time. Okay. There we go. Okay. I think I have found it. Can you see it now?
Yep, it is up.
Okay,
thank you.
amazing. All right, so we can get started. So yes, as Professor Phillips, you guys can still hear me, right? Okay, good.
I can hear you.
As Professor Phillips introduced earlier, I would like to present to you guys my working dissertation for my MA program, which is American Culture for Export, the 1959 Ballet USA Tour in Iceland. So it seems to be taking a long time to load as well. There we go. Okay. Well, the image does not seem to. I'll just do it in this way. Okay. Okay. None of the images seem to be loading, so I'll just do it in. Okay, this is not working, so I will. If you hold on for 2 seconds, I have another way of doing it. I was anticipating this happening, so give me 2 seconds and I will go into It's a good thing we have some extra time then.
Veronika, are you using the same presentation that you used yesterday?
Well, I added 2 extra slides, but I saved it on Google as well in case the
Okay.
PowerPoint didn't work. So that's what I'm doing right now. There we go. Okay, so now I will do this one more time. Window. Here we go. Okay. And you see my Chrome screen now, correct?
Correct.
Okay, this is finally getting somewhere.
Great.
You see it full screen?
We see it full screen.
Okay, amazing. Okay, back into it. All right. So, for 2 non-consecutive years in 1959 and 1961, the modernist ballet troupe Ballet USA toured throughout Europe with the sole intent to introduce American dance at its finest across the entire continent. However, this was no ordinary privately funded ballet troupe. Ballet USA holds the distinction of being the only dance troupe organized and funded by the US government for its own intents and purposes. So on this map that I took forever to load, this is the map of the Maiden 1959 tour, where we can see how the troupe traveled from cultural capital to capital. Many of these, Paris and Salzburg and Stuttgart and Spoleto as well, are very well-known cities, London, Edinburgh, but one seems to stand out, which is Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. Reykjavik at the time could only barely claim the population of around 150,000 people. So why then would a troupe such as this, one led by one of the most talented and famous dancers of the time, Jerome Robbins, choose to make Reykjavik one of its final stops, let alone perform 4 consecutive nights in a row? So what I hypothesize and what I hope to show here in this presentation is that due to its strategic importance and the threat of Soviet influence on Icelandic culture, the positive reception of Ballet USA was a diplomatic success for the United States. So, in order to fully explore this, I want to first present a quick introduction to the man who really made Ballet USA for what it is, Jerome Robbins. So there's in fact really, there's no way to break down the life of such a renowned showman and dancer such as Robbins, yet I'm going to try to do my best here. So working closely with George Balanchine, who is also another incredibly famous world-renowned dancer, choreographer, and founder of the New York City Ballet for most of their careers, Jerome Robbins has left a large body of work behind that may be recognizable to most people, such as, for example, Fiddler on the Roof, West Side Story, On the Town, and most importantly, Fancy Free, which was his sort of big break. Even further, he is even credited as director of West Side Story. So when West Side Story won the Oscar, Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins actually split credit for directing. However, what is most relevant and peculiar to his life story in reference to his participation in Ballet USA are his political leanings. So as a longtime member of the Communist Party of America, Robbins would soon turn on his ideology during the Red Scare. And to some within the dance community, he is actually most known for ratting out or naming 10 artists in the trials of the House of Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC. So it's perhaps then this exact sort of political heel turn, if I can call it that made him perfect for the US government's aim with Ballet USA. So Ballet USA in itself, it was brought together for the Festival of Two Worlds in Spoleto originally, and the Brussels World Fair as well, where the official intent was to give young artists a chance to work and develop, in quotes. That is what the official intent was. And this was done in association with the International Culture Program of the United States. However, as stated, this idea of a touring ballet troupe in the name of American cultural diplomacy was in fact completely unique to Ballet USA. It had never been attempted, and despite its relative success, would never be attempted again. Even further, what makes this touring company unique is that this idea of a ballet troupe created solely for American diplomatic purposes seems inherently Soviet, and in a way goes completely against America's intent to portray their culture as free from any constraints. What seems to counteract this question is the fact that the performances were modernist, performed by a mixed-race cast, and led by a vocal former communist turned informer, which in a way makes this sort of a turn to a more Soviet approach to cultural diplomacy make more sense, in which the US government is sort of showing their intent at using their own enemies' tactics against themselves. So, however, the question still remains as to whether there really was a looming communist threat to American interests in one of the least populated countries in in Europe, which is Iceland. So, as such, I'll now do a brief overview of U.S.-Iceland relations as of 1959. So, although there had been minimal diplomatic contact between the two nations, one could say that by 1941, when the Americans took over Allied occupation of Iceland from the British, marks the beginning of an intricate and highly tense, at least on the Icelandic side of things, relationship between the two countries. Tension between the troops and Icelandic citizens is said to have reached a head in 1941 to 42 in what is most often referred to as the situation years in Icelandic, where this period is characterized by violent public discourse in regards to the relationship between American soldiers and young Icelandic women, which led to one of the biggest
Have other people lost Veronika?
Yes.
I'm not, should we give it another minute and then maybe I'll bring in questions for Clara? If Veronika doesn't stream back in. I know she was getting kicked off of her internet. Does anyone have any questions for Clara? We can begin a discussion of ideas of cultural diplomacy. Would anybody like to raise their hand? Yes, J.S. Hahn. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
I'm sorry, I don't know how to change my display. My name's Jeff. I'm actually at LSE. So it's a very interesting presentation. Cultural diplomacy is not something I know a lot about, and it's been very enjoyable hearing about it. My question regarding the Spoleto Festival is specifically in the fundraising. I know from my own research, there is a trend among U.S. elites going all the way back to 1917. Debatable, of course, whether or not that was actually the start of the Cold War, but we know the Bolshevik Revolution really frightened a lot of the U.S. elites. But there was a recurring trend of the idea that if the people within the Soviet states or within communist states could be exposed to American culture and true ideals, or true information, they would rapidly turn against communism. And do you think that the founder of Spoleto Festival was playing on this well-worn idea in order to do the fundraising? Or, is there anything in your research that he himself was an actual believer in this idea that American culture could, for better or worse, undermine the communist ideology?
Thank you for your question. I think, yeah, absolutely. Whether or not I think definitely in how he portrayed it to wealthy Americans, that's definitely how he advertised it. I mean, I don't have them on hand, but there are several quotes from letters where it was a large mission of the Spoleto Festival is to like portray American culture to international audiences, especially in Europe, and I think it has succeeded. And the underlying message there to me always kind of read like, this is important for proving like the superiority of American culture because it is superior. I don't know if that makes sense at all. Now, again, I'm not sure if the reason why he wrote it like that was because he actually believed it or because he knew that that was kind of the only way to get money because he knew that, you know, wealthy Americans would be into that and would like want to give money for that cause. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to come in? All right, well, Clara, you know, you've heard a lot from me. Oh, here we go. Hannah.
Yeah, hi. That was a really great presentation, Clara. I just wanted to ask, in your research, did you come across any other types of any other artists, I guess you could say, or cultural icons who you might be able to like who you think this, like, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think this is a phenomenon unique to Menotti, or do you think it's like this political insinuation behind some of his works, or do you think it applies to more composers and writers and artists in general? Yeah.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you for your question. No, I don't think this is only specific to Menotti. I mean, I only really focused on him, so the only documents I found were about him. I didn't really like go anywhere else. But I do know, I mean, even I've talked about this with Professor Phillips a lot. She looked at Martha Graham in the Cold War, and she played kind of a, similar role, an artist who says that she's not political, but then she goes on all of these tours to basically like for that are U.S. diplomatic tours. So no, I don't think that this is limited to him, but I do think that a lot of these, characters that kind of like him or like Martha Graham do sometimes float underneath the surface. And so they're not always super easy to find, but yeah, I don't think that this is isolated just to him. But thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to tie your work into a past presenter at the conference, at the Corvinus conference, Giancarlo gave a paper several years ago about the use of Italians to do cultural diplomacy. So it's artists, but also the Italian factor, I think, is really interesting. Farah.
Yeah, hi, Clara. I apologize for not having the video on. So I was just wondering what were the domestic implications of American cultural diplomacy abroad. In other words, funding is the major concern for any kind of cultural enterprise. And as far as I know, up until the beginning of the Cold War, America had this very lax, very unsystematic mode of supporting the arts and culture at home. And then all of these tours began with vast investment of public resources into cultural production, be it films or music. So I wonder if you can also understand the Cold War as a phenomenon of shared history in which the cultural professionals on either side of the Iron Curtain, be it the Soviet Union or the USA, really enjoyed it ample, and perhaps the one and only moment when they could really enjoy so much money to do all sorts of crazy undertakings, including the one we're listening about now, yes, the Iceland tour. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm not, in terms of domestic implications, apart from the money, I am not sure what other implications there would have been, or Yeah, I think it was because also a lot of the money came specifically from private fund like sources, like the Rockefellers or apparently also the Fords and other big names like that. So I don't know how that would have specifically impacted the, I guess the people of the United States. And I don't really know how the money from the where the money from the government was coming from. I'm not sure if that answers your question or if I understood fully.
Even if it was private money, it didn't mean that it was like unpublic money, because of the tax brace system and the tax incentive. So in one way or another, we're talking about the tax money that hasn't reached the budget yet. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. Yeah, I don't really know. I didn't go that deep into that part of the research, so I don't know exactly where the money was coming from, but that's definitely a super important part of how the festival was able to come about. Thank you.
And before we get back to Veronika, Farah, I just wanted to let you know that there's wonderful work done by Lauren Aaron Brown, and recently in the Cold War Journal, and she basically argues that because of the Cold War, the artists were awash in money. And that since the Cold War, funding for artists has diminished significantly, and that is part of the really negative fallout from the Cold War. So there's interesting work being done there on a theoretical basis. And with that, I will turn it over to Veronika. Back we go.
Can you all hear me still?
Yep,
okay,
hear
so
you.
where did it cut off? Because I just kept going after.
We got, if you pull up your slide, I'll show you which slide, but we
Yes,
basically just started with a review of Iceland.
Okay. Of Icelandic relations then?
Yes.
Okay, well, I completely apologize. I have no idea. It seems so. You all see my screen still? I think I'm gonna refrain from pressing the present button because I feel like that's what messes everything up.
So if you keep going.
It was here.
Correct. So we just started that slide.
Okay. Let me go back there. All right. So sorry about that. I don't really know what happened, but we'll just carry on. U.S.-Iceland relations. So what I'm going to do is a brief overview. I'm not sure where we ended, but so although there was minimal diplomatic contact between U.S. and Iceland for as long as the U.S. has really been independent, by 1941, when the Americans took over from the British of the occupation of Iceland during World War II, really marks the beginning of a very intricate and tense relationship between the two countries. So tension between troops and Icelandic citizens is said to have really reached a head in 1941 and 1942 in what is referred to as the situation years in Icelandic historiography. So this period is really characterized by a violent public discourse in regards to the relationship between American soldiers and young Icelandic women, leading to one of the biggest breaches in civilian privacy in all of Icelandic history. And this period is still today one of the most taboo and sensitive areas of Icelandic history, and despite records showing that it affected almost tens of thousands of women, no one has ever come forward with their story. So although this tension sort of dwindled in the years following the Icelandic independence in 1944, the continued presence of the U.S. Army in Keflavik would constantly be debated in Icelandic society and politics. Despite this, Iceland's strategic geographic importance was a driving force that would keep the Americans in Keflavik until 2006. So, one of the biggest threats to U.S. presence in Iceland during the Cold War can clearly be seen in the influence of Soviet culture on Icelandic cultural elite. One of the most, if not the most influential Icelandic cultural ambassador, if I could call him that, is Nobel Prize winner Halldór Laxness. Laxness was a very vocal supporter of the Communist Party. Most of his work, which is considered Iceland's greatest literature, really relies heavily on themes of communism. And Laxness was also, in fact, very vocal in his dislike of American culture and its dangers to Icelandic culture in his published personal memoirs, which became wildly popular at the time. As such, it seems suspicious that the very year that Laxness won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1955, the American Congress for Cultural Freedom, a known CIA-sponsored exploration of cultural diplomacy, sent Nobel laureate William Faulkner to Iceland. So what this visit by Faulkner really shows us is that the US government was more than willing to send the biggest names in the business in order to clamp down on any burgeoning communist undertones in Icelandic culture. And a brief look at documents in the archives of NATO and the CIA that I've been able to access digitally show us that there was at least some concern in regards to the increasing Soviet presence in Iceland at the time. A CIA analysis on the country found that almost 25% of Icelandic exports were being purchased by the USSR, which is a lot for a country whose entire GDP relies solely on foreign exports. Following a NATO report of a meeting concerned with government-sponsored cultural activities warned that special attention needs to be devoted to outlying countries such as Iceland specifically. All of this goes to show that increased Soviet influence definitely seems to have piqued the interest of US officials, especially if they were ever concerned that the tide of Icelandic public discourse would finally turn on the Americans. On November 1st, 1959, Jerome Robbins and his Ballet USA troupe arrived first at Keflavik Air Base and then quickly made their way to Reykjavik, which is only a 40-minute drive away. During his stay in Iceland, Robbins was interviewed by cultural journalist Thor Vilhjálmsson for the culture journal Birtingur. Although very standard in terms of interviews, Vilhjálmsson notes that Robbins seemed very interested in Icelandic progress since the end of the war and Icelandic culture, remarking that he thought it was incredible that the city of Reykjavik had been able to grow as much as it had in the past 10 years. The only place where Robbins really seems to lose interest, according to the interviewer, is when Vilhjálmsson attempts to crack fish jokes at Iceland's expense. But despite this, the Ballet USA official tour analysis produced at the end of 1959 corroborates Vilhjálmsson's assertions of Robbins' interest in Iceland. And what this tour analysis shows us even further is that Robbins and his company seem to have fulfilled their roles as diplomats exactly as the US government intended. So this tour analysis also, it really gives us the best overview of the reaction to the 4 performances performed in November. Citing numerous Icelandic newspaper reviews, which I've been able to find, most of them that are mentioned in this analysis, and I can say that they do in fact say what the analysis tells us. All refer to Robbins's immense talent and great showmanship, and deem the performance a thunderous success. Even the most left-leaning newspapers and one of the biggest detractors of American presence in Iceland, specifically Þjóðviljann, which is a newspaper, the official paper of the Communist Party of Iceland, praises Robbins' undeniable talent and was thoroughly impressed with the troupe as a whole. In comparison, this is a tidbit that I found in the 1959 official tour analysis, a following performance by the Peking Opera only a week later did nowhere near as well as Robbins' crew. Although the official, the analysis admits that there might have been a sort of culture fatigue in Icelandic society by the time that the guests arrived, but all in all, this still doesn't detract from the fact that the Ballet USA tour was deemed a complete success. Even so far as saying it was one of the most successful of the Ballet USA performances. So, in conclusion, when we look back at the Ballet USA tour in Iceland, there seems to really be 3 main components to the story. Number 1 is the reason for the continued US presence in Iceland, its strategic geographic position between North America and Europe, wherein this importance made the ever-increasing presence of Soviet culture in Icelandic high society a bigger concern for American and NATO officials. As such, the fact that the 1959 Ballet USA tour in Iceland was both a relative commercial and strategic success, then in American cultural diplomacy, shows us that the tour of 1959 achieved its intended goals. Even further, as a sort of closing line, one way that we can really gauge the reciprocal effects of the 1959 tour is through the story of the current principal choreographer of the San Francisco Ballet, Helge Tomasson. So Tomasson attended the performance at the age of 17, only to be discovered by Robbins himself for his great talent in ballet. Robbins would then go on to sponsor Tomasson's admission to the School of American Ballet here in New York City, introducing him to George Balanchine, which would then lead him to become a principal dancer for the New York City Ballet, wherein Balanchine and Robbins would then go on to write roles specifically for Helge Tomasson in many of their places, which is crazy considering that you have an Icelander, you have a man from Georgia who's come to the U.S. and Robbins. So it's the true epitome of a cultural exchange. But yeah, so I think that is what, I don't know how to stop sharing, so we'll just do, there we go. Okay. All right, are we back in the meeting room?
You are back.
We're good, okay, after everything that happened, but we prevail.
Thank you so much. We have another question from J.S. Hahn. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Apologies.
It's quite all right. I have no idea how to change it. So technology is, the gremlins are out in force today, it seems. It's a very interesting presentation, Ms. Johnson. Iceland's, I've always found to be a very fascinating country. I was curious if there was any strategy or thinking behind the choice of medium to represent American culture. I know the Soviets and Russians before them traditionally, and Russia even today, traditionally considered like the source of ballet. You know, was this kind of like the whole Miracle on Ice later in the 80s, kind of an attempt to challenge the Soviet dominance while also, you know, reinforcing the positive aspects of American culture?
Yes, very much so. Like that was the I hope that you guys got my part about Jerome Robbins himself and the Ballet USA tour, wherein so the whole organization of Ballet USA is in direct contrast to the sort of classical Soviet ballet. So here you have this modernist, former communist, multi mixed race cast, which was also a big, you know, contrast to the Soviet ballet. Sort of to enhance, to combat this sort of the classical narrative coming from the USSR. So it's the complete opposite, showing America as a sort of free, open country, even though they were using a very Soviet tactic to do it. If that sort of answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you.
While we're waiting for other questions from the audience, and please do come in. Oh, you know what? Here we go. Janos. Glad to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for both of the presentations. I hope you can hear and see me. Great. I thought it would be interesting to add another view of cultural diplomacy, which is the Soviet side of thinking. And I did some research a few years ago in which I've looked at state security cooperation between Hungary and other states, also the Soviets. And it was very interesting to see what they called ideological diversion. In Hungarian, it was ideológiai fellazítás, which literally softening up. And culture was an important part of that, as far as I could tell. So books, plays, and other stuff. In the early 50s, as far as I know, the CIA experimented with exporting Bibles and other books, also Orwell, who was really a great criticizer of the Soviet system. And also there was Radio Free Europe, which after 1956 turned into a very major exporter of Western values, also culture, music. In the Hungarian side, there were many important people who interpreted Western music, and also you could communicate with them if you had luck. So it was a very interesting cultural feedback, and also people who were cut off from this side of the world had an opportunity this way to have a different view from the West compared to what the state authorities presented to them. And this was very frightening to the Soviet system, as it was a very important counter view to the official propaganda. And also things like this are capable of motivating people to cooperate in some cases. So ideology is a very important thing, and culture is a major underpinning of ideological commitment. And as far as I can tell, these activities could be a very important factor for people in the Eastern Bloc to form their views against the ruling authorities. So I hope you will be able to use these few thoughts in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, János. I would encourage you both to come to the History Online seminar with Mark Kramer to learn how to use, potentially use some Soviet sources to see if your figures appear there. Is there anybody else? Well, while we're waiting for other people, this is something that I think you both grapple with, and I've not asked you this question before, and you seem to both come out on different sides of this. I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit on how you might approach the issue of biography. So in both cases, you have a key actor in a political debate that involves nations. And how do you see framing the individual and using using strategies of biography in this kind of national, international context, or are you more interested in the politics of it?
Clara, if you want to go. Okay, I mean, for me, there is this very interesting aspect to Robbins as an individual, but what really drew me is obviously like the effect it had on Iceland. So I guess that's more of like the diplomatic side, but you can't get away from how much he is a part, like he is this show. He is the show, the troupe is the show as well, but it's his masterpiece, and it's his sort of connection then to Iceland, which then continues for years and years and years. And I didn't mention it in the presentation, but even further, his personal assistant was Icelandic. He was an Icelandic actor, and so he's kept this connection to the country for years afterwards. So it's a very big part of, I think, also the diplomatic the part of the project. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I also think the biography of Menotti is very important. I mean, partially because the politics, they're interesting, but they've been looked at, like, the greater themes have been looked at before. They're not like anything that new. But he himself is a really weird character, and like what, you know, just his life in general, something that I didn't mention in the presentation, which I found in his obituary, and I was like, which really struck me, was that he was actually in a relationship with Samuel Barber for 40 years. They were partners, which also I was like, whoa, you know, that definitely is huge, especially for the time in which he lived in. So yeah, there's just a lot about him that's very, I don't know, just very striking, and he seems to really have just floated below the surface. So yeah, I think biography over politics.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that's kind of the thinking that I got from your presentations. But in both cases, I would encourage you to, you know, in Clara, in your case, I would encourage you to look through the national lens, and Veronika, I would encourage you to go into the biographical, maybe to reject it in the end, but just to kind of surround the issue, right? But they are two extremely distinct choices. And I think you've both done an excellent job. Would anybody else like to come in with questions? Well, all right then. Thank you both for your presentations. Thank you for your hard work. Of course, I look forward to